Hey there, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Tolkien Road, episode 378, or episode 13 in the Do Not Be Hasty Reckoning. I'm calling this one Sam at the Green Dragon.
Nice.
In this episode, we continue our epic gallivant through Lord of the Rings, Book 1, Chapter 2, The Shadow of the Past. Greta,
Hey.
have you ever gone sailing over the sea?
Ooh. I've been sailing.
Mm-hmm.
Haven't gone very far because
Yeah.
the boat capsized. But
I thought that story might come up. Yes, the old capsize where or in the Delaware Bay.
The Delaware Bay.
Yeah.
Yep, the Delaware Bay. I think that was the first and last time I ever set foot on a sailboat. But I know you in your Navy career, you've been on much more sailing adventures than I have.
True.
Yeah.
I have been sailing over the sea.
Yeah.
Not all the way over the sea in terms of all the way to Europe or something like that. But definitely done my fair share of sailing. All right. Before we begin, we'd like to give a double up air five to our amazing fellowship. Stick 'em up, fellowship. 3, 2, 1. Whoopsh. Nice.
That was very good.
Special thanks to this episode's executive producers, Caitlin of Tea with Tolkien, John R., KG, Melkor27, Saber Systems, and Jeremy D.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thank you all so much. And a shout out to those celebrating their fellowship anniversary in June of 2024. Richard B.W., Teresa C., and James L.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for sticking with us over the years. All right, in this episode of Do Not Be Hasty, we continue through The Shadow of the Past as we listen in on Sam's speculations at the Green Dragon concerning elves and tree-men. This section begins with the words, "Little of all this, of course, reached the ears of ordinary hobbits," and ends with, "And they stayed up far into the night." All right. So, this section takes place in Frodo's 50th year, as we mentioned in the last episode. Shadow of the Past, we jump 17 years from the first chapter. 3001 to 3018 of the Third Age. Sam is, at this point, 38 years old, having been born in Third Age 2980. So, all right, well, let's just jump right in to the Green Dragon action here. Most hobbits remained oblivious to the news about Mordor and the reconstruction of Barad-dûr, as we discussed at the end of the last episode. Still, there was talk, and we become a fly on the wall for a conversation between Samwise Gamgee and Ted Sandyman at the Green Dragon in Bywater. Just to kind of give a picture of where that is specifically. So let me try to zoom in a little bit on our map of the Shire here. So just so we understand, here is the hill. Right?
Bag End.
Right there. That's where Bag End is. Yeah. And then, if you remember that picture that we have of that Tolkien drew of Hobbiton, and it's like kind of the view from across the water. That kind of encompasses this area right here, right? You know which image I'm talking about there, Greta?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then just a little bit down the road, not very far, is Bywater, and that's where the Green Dragon is. That's the Green Dragon is located here in the village of Bywater. So,
looks like it could be a fair distance.
I mean, it's not like right down the street, but it's it's probably, let's see if we've got a sense of if we have a scale here on this. I don't see one actually. I don't see one. Well, yeah, I mean, it's obviously walkable because Sam is there, on an evening, right? And he's going to go home right after this.
Yeah.
There's a road that connects the two.
Yeah.
So it's not a huge distance, but it's it's a little bit of a walk. But one thing we know about hobbits is they don't seem to mind walking.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Well, they got those feet that were made for walking, so all good there.
It's interesting how this section seems like a kind of recapitulation of the Gaffer's conversation at the Ivy Bush 17 years earlier, where, in fact, he disputed with Ted Sandyman's father, the miller of the time. Did you pick up on that, Greta?
It felt a little it felt vaguely familiar, the whole conversation, so that's probably why.
Yeah, it's a really interesting touch, and, one that I've noticed before, but for some reason, and you almost think, like, Tolkien had a reason for doing this, because what I'm referring to is in that I think it was almost like the second or third episode through A Long Expected Party, we meet the gaffer, and he's at the Ivy Bush, another kind of pub in 17 years before, and he's having a conversation with Ted Sandyman's father, the miller, who, and it's very standoffish between them as well, right?
Yep.
Now, there's other hobbits involved in that conversation, but it's interesting that like it's just kind of this sense of like history repeating itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting too because you think about obviously Frodo. We know that Frodo, in a way, is going to be repeating Bilbo's history, right? So it's just kind of like this theme of it kind of being passed on to generation to generation. Right. Yeah.
If there's any thoughts on that, I'd love to hear your comments. Or drop them on Patreon or YouTube. I just it's an interesting little note to me. Maybe I'll discover something when we do our Mathoms episode that will illuminate why Tolkien kind of did this, but it definitely stands out to me. I think there's a reason. There must be some kind of reason that he would have done this. So anyway, I just think it's an interesting question.
Yeah.
So we learned that Sam is one of those interested in the queer things you hear of these days, right? So meaning the days of the that all these stories are taking place in. Ted views such things as fireside tales and children's stories. So Ted is very much of like, he's not just of the mindset of like, that like, well, I don't know what those things are all about, but he views them as it's just hogwash. It's like, whatever, these things, they're not real, whatever stories you're hearing about, they're just things people are making up, and Sam's response to that is basically like, who invented the stories then? Who, take dragons, right? And one thing about Ted Sandyman, is that he just always has these kind of flippant and dismissive, even mocking responses for Sam, right? Sam seems to be genuinely interested in wanting to understand, like, why are we hearing all these stories, Ted Sandyman is just kind of like this flippant and he just always has a ready response to kind of poke fun at Sam for even wasting his time thinking about these things. I was just trying to think, like, what's one word for Ted Sandyman here? And jerk is too simple a term. Let's be more specific. How would you describe his attitude and flippancy towards Sam? I think about like there's another podcast about like kind of legends and that kind of thing of our own time that I like to listen to. It's called there are a few. There's Astonishing Legends, and they'll cover things like Bigfoot and Skinwalker Ranch and these kinds of questions, UFOs. There's another one, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Very big fan of both of these podcasts. And what I really appreciate about them is they don't necessarily just say like, well, all these things are true, but they really look at them closely and kind of like try to understand. Like they take them seriously, right? They're like, there's something going on here, right? There's something strange going on here. It may not be as woo woo as it seems at first, but like there's something going on here, and I can handle like people who are like want to provide a more rational explanation for certain things. A more non-mysterious explanation for certain things. I can be okay with that, but it's people like Ted Sandyman who just want to be dismissive and flippant and even mocking towards people who are kind of fascinated by those things. Really bother me.
Yeah, I can see that because it's like there's just not even a willingness to entertain the possibility. Like it's very just like. It's really disrespectful in a way. And it's just like, oh, that's just silliness, like there's no reason. And I feel a little sorry for Ted because I'm like, that's just not a fun way to live, to not even be willing to entertain the possibility that these things could be true. I mean, it's very narrow-minded, but it's almost more than that. It's just like this, like it's just like choosing to just like to not have any imagination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what's important about this conversation between Sam and Ted is that it really shows that Sam, like it shows that this, like I think Tolkien almost sees Sam's curiosity about these things as a virtue, right? Is that it's a character strength of Sam,
agreed.
right? That he's not like maybe most other hobbits in that way, but he is like has a genuine curiosity. He maybe even has that same sense of wanderlust that he listened to Bilbo's stories and he let them kind of fill him with something good,
it's
right?
Like there's a childlike wonder there.
Yeah.
And that's where it's just kind of, like it's almost Ted has been hardened in some way, right? Where he doesn't have like just that childlike awe that I feel like Sam obviously has.
Well, we think back to Ted's father, and it's like it's kind of maybe this is why Tolkien did this. This is interesting to think about their fathers and what they imparted to them, right? The Gaffer obviously was not like, maybe not as like, he was maybe a little bit more of a down to earth hobbit than Sam is, by nature, but but still he spoke highly of Bilbo and Frodo, right? And he you can kind of see a little bit of that coming through in Sam, but Sam kind of takes it to the next level. Whereas it almost seems like Ted Sandymant having the father that he did, it must have just like taken any opportunity of that like sense of wonder towards the world kind of out of him, right? Just he was taught to be a mocker, and a scoffer by his father rather than someone who's like, oh yeah, the world is a pretty fascinating place.
You're absolutely right. And that can very easily be, that's obviously something that can be passed on from parent to child, just the way that you view the world and your curiosity or you're not. So, yeah,
it's just nice. It's a good warning to like kind of be careful about what, example, you pass along to your kids, right?
So
what kind of people do you want them to be? Do you want them to be a Sam or do you want them to be a Ted?
Yeah, that's a great
I think
point.
most of us who are reading The Lord of the Rings would probably want our kids to be Sams.
Definitely want to be Sams.
Right.
For sure. Cautiously, like, discerning. Yeah. Right? Like, not just to be like, oh, of course it's all true. And, I mean, that's its own, like, that has its own pitfalls for sure. But to just, be malleable, like, let your mind be stretchy enough to entertain the possibility of there being more than meets the eye.
Yeah, and ultimately in the case of Sam, that leads to the kind of this unexpected heroism.
Yeah,
you're right.
Exactly. Exactly. Great point. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that Sam mentions that he's heard rumors of is tree-men seen on the North Moors. So again, going back to our map of the Shire, we don't see the North Moors on the map of the Shire here, but they're essentially somewhere kind of up in this area, right? So a little bit off the map here of the Shire. For some reason it doesn't want me to do any more marking. Anyway, so it good bit away from Hobbiton up here in this area. Sam has heard these stories about tree-men. So I said it's about 50 miles northwest of Hobbiton. But he's heard about these tree-men from Halfast Gamgee, who is his cousin. And Halfast supposedly saw one, claims to have seen one when he was hunting in the North Farthing, which would be up in that area. We do see the North Farthing marked here on the map. So
Yep.
And so one note that the Reader's Companion brought up is that Hal's hunting was presumably for food. In the prologue, it says that hobbits killed nothing for sport.
Wait, what?
So in the Reader's Companion, it says that Halfast was hunting for food and not for sport.
House hunting. I was like, why are they house hunting?
No,
okay.
Hal's hunting.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, I can see why you would have thought that.
Okay, gotcha.
So Halfast described it as big as an elm tree and walking 7 yards to a stride if it was an inch. So, of course, what does this make you think of, Greta?
Ents.
Obviously. Of course, right?
Yeah.
Now, this made me think, like, really, there were Ents up in this part of the, up in the Shire, right? That's a lot closer, to the Shire than Fangorn Forest is, right? Where they eventually we eventually meet the Ents.
Yeah.
So it's surprising to hear these kinds of rumors. It even makes you think, like, maybe Halfast had just heard these stories and thought he saw something that was was an ent, or maybe it was some other kind of creature. Maybe it was
maybe a relation,
a relative of an ent or something of that nature. And one note that it also makes in the Reader's Companion is that the ent strides are, as described when we actually do meet an ent, are much shorter than 7 yards. They're nowhere near that size. So 7 yards, you think of that's like 21 feet, right?
Oh yeah.
Probably when I'm trying to walk a yard, it's kind of it's a little bit of a stretch, for me. So that would be like a very large, very large distance to cover.
Yeah, for sure. Even for an ent.
But then again, the Old Forest is on the eastern border of the Shire, and we do know that really strange creatures live there, so it's possible that there are other creatures of that nature that live in the forests up to the north.
Yeah.
So anyway, so again, no wow, that's interesting from Sandyman, just dismissal and understated sarcasm. He just basically says, well, if I mean, let's kind of read this just to get a sense of what a kind of annoying jerk Ted Sandyman is. He says, Sam says, but this one was as big as an elm tree and walking 7 yards to a stride if it was an inch. And Sandyman says, then I bet it wasn't an inch. What he saw was an elm tree, as like as not. But this one was walking, I tell you, and there ain't no elm trees on the North Moors. Then Hal can't have seen one, said Ted. There was some laughing and clapping. The audience seemed to think that Ted had scored a point. And it's like, again, you just have the sense of like, for Ted, it's more about like scoring points, like in some weird way, like popularity contest, whatever it is. Whereas Sam is like trying to be like, what are these stories? Where are they coming from? Like, why are people seeing these things? Right. And Ted's attitude is just to be completely dismissive. It's a very frustrating attitude.
Yeah. For sure.
All right. Well, let's consider this passage about the elves. Greta, do you want to read this passage that's highlighted in kind of pink purple here?
All the same, said Sam, you can't deny that others besides our Halfast have seen queer folk crossing the Shire. Crossing it, mind you. There are more that are turned back at the borders. The bounders have never been so busy before. And I've heard tell that elves are moving west. They do say they are going to the harbours, out away beyond the White Towers. Sam waved his arm vaguely. Neither he nor any of them knew how far it was to the sea, past the old towers beyond the western borders of the Shire. But it was an old tradition that away over there stood the Grey Havens, from which at times elven ships set sail, never to return. They are sailing, sailing, sailing over the sea. They are going into the west and leaving us, said Sam, half chanting the word, shaking his head sadly and solemnly. But Ted laughed.
Yeah. So, I mean, you really start to see that Sam, enters into this story already very enamored of these old legends, of these old stories. He wants to be so much more than just a gardener, right? He wants to know more about these stories. And maybe for right now, it's just he wants to know more. He just wants to know more.
Yeah.
Maybe he doesn't really want to go and be part of these stories, but he at least wants to know more. And that's kind of the place that he begins. And we do learn that the elves are moving west, as I think you asked at the end of the last episode. They're moving out towards the White Towers and to eventually leave and sail over the sea. Now, Ted at least knows enough about to know that to be familiar with these stories himself, right? He says, well, that isn't anything new if you believe the old tales, and I don't see what it matters to me or you. Let them sail, but I warrant you haven't seen them doing it, nor anyone else in the Shire. And it turns out Sam does believe he once saw an elf in the woods. And you kind of wonder, did he really, or was he just kind of seeing things because he wanted to see elves? But anyway, we know the elves are there. I mean, they are wandering through the woods, but they probably try to avoid, the hobbits as much as they're able. So
part of me wonders if Sandyman's attitude is really coming from a place of fear here, because I mean, there is something a little disconcerting, right? Like when you start seeing creatures or, things in your hometown that you've never seen before. it can be like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Like it can be kind of scary to think about, right?
Yeah.
I speak from experience, honestly. I don't watch the news, as you know, and
Mm-hmm.
I pride myself on living under a rock. And part of that is because I'm just like I don't want to know. Like blissful ignorance. Like
Yeah.
I just don't want to know. So I kind of wonder if that might be a part of where Sandyman is coming from, or he just be a little scared, honestly, to think about the possible implications of this.
Yeah, I mean, well, and unfortunately, the news of our world doesn't usually contain discussion about elves and their departure over the seas.
No.
Much worse
No.
things. So I completely understand where you're coming from. But yeah, I think there is some, sort of and maybe he sounds like kind of smug and self-confident in his own sort of blissful ignorance about these things, because it's just something it's a behavior he's learned so long ago, and he's like, don't waste my time. I have Miller work to attend to, and it's just a way that he's just lived this way so long that he sounds confident in everything in it, but really it does belie this like kind of deep-seated fear about what the outside world might have to allow, right?
Which is interesting because Sam is obviously interested. Like he wants to get to the bottom of it and see what's out there, right? Whereas Sandyman is very much the opposite. He just kind of wants to, he's got his blinders on. He's got this very myopic. He's like, oh, I just, he has no desire to really expand his horizons or his, his view of things. He's quite content where he is.
Absolutely.
Maybe to a fault.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you really hear Sam's longing for something more than mundane coming through in all of this. I think that's my biggest takeaway. Sam wants more out of life than just gardening in the Shire. Like Frodo, he seems to have a longing for something beyond the borders.
Yeah.
But he also really does a good job of not getting too riled up by Sandyman's attitude. I think I probably would have wanted to punch Ted Sandyman by the end of this personally. So good on Sam. Again, it shows real virtue, kind of deep-seated virtue, I think, in Sam and all of this.
Yeah. Yep.
It turns out that Sam was one of the young hobbits that used to listen to Bilbo's stories, and he really took them to heart. Of course, the Gamgees lived, on Bagshot Road, just the three homes that they lived in one of those homes that was just down the hill from Bag End. And I did want to talk about Sandyman's little comment here, about you'll never want for moonshine, right? If that's where you get your news from, meaning Bilbo and Frodo, then you'll never want for moonshine. So of course I hear moonshine and I think of the very strong alcoholic beverage moonshine. But for the Reader's Companion, this is just referring to foolish talk and nonsense. But at the same time, I'm like, well, I think you can make a case that it could also refer to the actual beverage of moonshine.
Right, it's almost saying like you'll never need to get drunk because like you're already like
you're already listening to these fools.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So Sandyman leaves Sam shortly thereafter, and he has a lot of gardening to attend to the next day. I loved the image of Sam as he was leaving here. It says, it was early. Pull this over here so we can read it. It was early, and the sky was now clearing after heavy rain. The sun was down, and a cool, pale evening was quietly fading into the night. He walked home under the early stars through Hobbiton and up the hill, whistling softly and thoughtfully. I just think that's a really nice image of Sam,
Even after just being through all that with Sandyman, I feel like I would be like mumbling to myself and been like, I can't believe that guy. What a jerk.
Yeah.
Like thinking of all the things, like all the comebacks I could have said, but Sam's just seems to just let it roll right off and moving about his business.
Yeah, and it's he doesn't seem to be like any less curious. It doesn't seem that he just kind of seems to think like, oh, that's Ted Sandyman for you.
He does not let Sandyman rain on his parade.
No, he doesn't.
Yeah.
Which is again virtuous on his part.
Absolutely, for sure.
So we'll briefly pick up with just a brief little snippet of conversation here between Gandalf and Frodo. So Gandalf returns, right, after being away for quite a long time, just to cover. Get a little drink there.
Thanks for narrating your
activities.
Sorry,
I went a little quiet there for a moment. Just to cover the years 3001 to 3018 for Gandalf. It was in 3004. So he leaves at the end of chapter 1, and that's 3001. And he doesn't return for 3 more years. And in 3004, he returns to visit Frodo. And from 3004 to 3008, he turns up fairly often in the Shire. But then after that, he's really gone, right? Frodo doesn't see him for a long time until now.
It's about 9 years, right?
Yeah. Till about 9 years, until it says it was just at this time that Gandalf reappeared after his long absence. It says it was that evening as Sam was walking home and twilight was fading, there came the once familiar tap on the study window of Bag End. Frodo welcomed his old friend with surprise and great delight. They looked hard at one another. "All well, eh?" said Gandalf. "You look the same as ever, Frodo." Key point, Frodo looks the same as ever, even 10 years later.
Yep.
"So do you," Frodo replied, but secretly he thought that Gandalf looked older and more careworn. He pressed him for news of himself and of the wide world, and soon they were deep in talk, and they stayed up far into the night. So Frodo thinks Gandalf looks older and more careworn, and they have this conversation that lasts long into the night. And that's where we'll pause our conversation for now. But Greta, did I miss anything important?
No. So just to clarify, the reason that Gandalf thinks Frodo looks the same as ever is because of the ring. Yeah.
Well, it doesn't say specifically, but I assume it's because of the radioactive ring effect, the RRE.
RRE. Gotcha.
Yeah, just as Bilbo didn't age all that much while he possessed it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I love the insight we get into Sam's character.
Yeah.
In this section, like it was kind of obviously the first big, move toward developing his character.
For sure.
And I really enjoyed it. For
sure.
Yeah.
Well, I loved hearing from Sam in this episode as well. I'm annoyed by Ted Sandyman's flippant and dismissive attitude towards Sam, but I'm somehow more deeply. I have more deep admiration for Sam's patience and semi-detachment towards Sandyman's ridicule. Mm-hmm. Next time, we'll be a fly on the wall for Frodo and Gandalf and begin to learn just why Gandalf is so concerned about Bilbo's ring. All right. Greta, tell them how they can support us.
All right. Well, first, you can join the Fellowship of the Road by visiting patreon.com/TolkienRoad. When you join the Fellowship of the Road, it helps us to keep on evering on and lands you some cool perks along the way. Learn more at patreon.com/TolkienRoad. Second, if you're... Oh, did you want to do that part?
I'll do it. Second, if you're watching, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know what's on your mind in the comments below.
Finally, subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes or the platform of your choice. If you are a 5-star fan of the Tolkien Road, you can really help us out by heading over to iTunes or your preferred source for the show and dropping us a rating and review. When you do that, it helps get the word out about the Tolkien Road, which helps us to keep on evering on.
As always, keep the correspondence coming. We'll do our best to respond to you somehow and at some point. With Don't Be Hasty, we'll let the mail pile up and then do a big mailbag episode at the end of each chapter. We can't promise you that it'll be read on air, but we'll do our best, and some correspondence most certainly will.
Don't forget to stop by truemythspress.com for great merch like super styling and comfy Tolkien Road t-shirts, 2 Trees camper mugs, and signed copies of John's books. Once again, that's truemythspress.com. Thanks for supporting our work with your purchase.
To close, as always, we'd like to thank our amazing fellowship. We know all of you half as well as we should like, and we've thanked less than half of you half as well as you deserve. Special thanks to the following:
John R.,
Caitlin of Tea with Tolkien,
KG,
Melkor27,
Saber Systems,
Jeremy D,
Emilio P,
Jonathan D,
Richard K,
Paul D,
Julia,
Wardy,
Chris B,
Tour91,
Carolyn S,
Emil K,
Brian O. II,
Jonathan R,
Matthew W,
Daniel D,
Harrison C,
Jason C,
Seb M,
Wilbo Baggins,
Ms. Anonymous,
Andrew T,
Red Hawk,
Shannon S,
Brian O. the First,
Zeke F,
James L,
Chris L,
Azia V,
Ish of the Hammer,
Teresa C,
David of Pints with Jack,
and Eric B.
Finally, thanks to all for watching and or listening. Until next time, the road goes ever on.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, y'all.